Landmark clinical trial in 8 sub-Saharan African countries will be the first to evaluate the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, of a COVID-19 vaccine in people living with HIV. The South African Medical Research Council says this is the first study to evaluate the efficacy of vaccines against the Omicron variant. To speak more about this, we're joined by the head of vaccines and HIV pathogenesis research at the Center for Aids Porgramme of Research in South Africa, Dr. Nigel Garrett. Doctor, a very good evening to you. Grateful for your time on the program. So just how much do we know at this stage about COVID and HIV positive people at a very preliminary level?
Thank you, Thembekile, and good evening to your viewers. Thanks for having me back on the program. So, we obviously most of the clinical trials that have been done started in the US first and then also Europe. We have been part of several studies in South Africa, especially the J&J trial that many of you viewers know about. But we have had very little vaccine research in terms of mRNA vaccines. So the study that we are about to start and we have started enrolling is about mRNA vaccines in sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa.
And I understand there'll be a particular focus on the Moderna vaccine. We're not using that in South Africa currently. Why that focus currently?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned that the HIV and COVID-19 kind of relationship. We all know there's a pandemic at the moment of COVID-19, but we also know that we're highly affected of a TB epidemic as well as HIV epidemic. We've had very little access to mRNA vaccines in Africa as a whole, but particularly Southern Africa. In South Africa, we had access to Pfizer. So I think the importance of this trial is really to find out more about vaccine responses in people living with HIV, and in particular with mRNA technology.
And you've got about 14,000, I think, volunteers at 54 clinical research sites right across the continent. South Africa is among them. Talk to us about the profiles of the countries selected and why you think perhaps those populations would be able to shed the best light.
Yeah, so we decided to include as many countries as possible. This is a National Institute of Health US-funded study. It's sponsored by the South African Medical Research Council. And we have country chairs in 8 countries, including South Africa, Eswatini, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, as well as Malawi. So hopefully we can start the study in all 8 countries. We started enrolling in South Africa on the 2nd of December, and the first dose of Moderna was administered, which was a landmark because it was the first time Moderna was administered in South Africa, essentially. And so the idea was that, access to mRNA technology has been very limited, and we're trying to provide the regulators with safety data so that they can also register these vaccines, mRNA vaccines, in their countries. And then hopefully we get an additional excellent vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, make that part of our armamentarium against COVID-19.
But you'll also have, I think, about 1,400 people who are HIV negative as part of the study. Why is it important to have them involved as well?
Yeah, so we've got about 12,800 HIV positive individuals, and we're obviously trying to focus on them, and we're looking at different regimens of different vaccine regimens, 3 versus 2. And then we also included some HIV negative people, volunteers who are happy to join the study. It's always good, to have different populations part of the study, because then that allows you also to compare immune responses. We're particularly interested in people also with low immune systems, so people can be on HIV treatment or not on treatment. Obviously, we're encouraging everyone to start treatment because we know that has health benefits, and we also think, and the hypothesis is that people on ART have better immune responses than people that are not on ART.
The one challenge, of course, with Africa as a whole, when it comes to vaccines, is that in South Africa, in fact, we're sitting with enough doses to vaccinate the entire population, but it's not so for the rest of the continent. So critical then would be the question of what trends we've noticed as far as the virus and HIV positive people. Are they more at risk or has the research shown at this stage that that's not so? Because I recall at the beginning of the pandemic, especially in South Africa, people said we have such a high number of HIV positive people, and they should have been among the first to get booster shots.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So overall, I think less than 7% of the population, adult population across these countries have been vaccinated. In South Africa, we are doing a little bit better with about 40%, but that's obviously vaccination of people is still the primary objective of all this. In terms of HIV positive responses, etc., it's important to consider that the responses are probably reduced in people that have that are not on ART. So we are extremely interested in obviously providing these people with vaccinations and also studying some of these immune responses.
Quick final one then, Doctor. You're doing this study, you're conducting this research in Africa. From when we started having the conversation about vaccines, there was a lot of talk about how scientists are using South African, well, not South Africans, but Africans as a whole, as guinea pigs for a scientific experiment. How would you address that question now?
Well, I think it's extremely important that we in Africa join these international collaborations and we are part of the solutions. So there's now a really big movement that we increase the vaccine capacity in Africa so that we can be part of, producing some of these vaccines ourselves. And it's also important that we work with some of these pharmaceutical companies. So, for example, if we look at Moderna are working currently on an Omicron variant booster, which is an important concept that needs to be studied. They also very heavily involved now. They have committed to HIV vaccine research. So it's obvious that we need to be involved in all the science and the research. And I think the idea of being guinea pigs then disappears because we understand the data, we are part of the studies, and we can then decide whether a product is good for our population or it isn't.
Dr. Nigel Garrett, good to speak to you. Dr. Nigel Garrett is head of vaccine and HIV pathogenesis research, speaking to us tonight about that study that will be rolled out across the African continent.